Celebrate what Jesus is doing throughout the nation and rise up to answer his call on your life. To serve the poor, heal the broken, free the captives, and bring joy to those in need. Find hope, encouragement, and motivation through Overcomers TV. This inspiring network features everyday people and ministries across America who are putting God's love in action. Tune in to Overcomers TV on your favorite app or streaming platform. It's time to overcome.
Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Servant Leadership, Christians in Politics. With me is Janice Giacchino and Bill Redmond. Thank you so much for joining us, guys.
Good to be here, Chuck.
Good morning.
Both of you are amazing and servant leaders, and you're humble about it, which is good, so I can brag upon you. And can't say that for everybody, but it's not easy serving people, because I know everybody has their ideas. And again, we live in a world where politics, some people would prefer to talk about anything else but politics, and also religion. So we like to couple the idea. Jesus is King of Kings, Lord of Lords. He was our greatest servant leader, right? Who led it all the way to the cross. And so I'd love to just open it up to both of you guys a little bit. Let's start with Bill. Janice and I have been doing the last couple of shows, and since we've started this, we wanted to pull you in. And we talk about people getting involved in politics and Christians, and I always love to ask you, why would somebody do that?
Why? Well, I think Christians especially need to be engaged. When we take a look at the word politics, Chuck, basically politics is the discussion of what kind of people we're going to be. And I don't know why Christians would not want to be at the table to participate in that discussion, so that the community in which every Christian lives, that their voice is heard. And it's not necessarily their voice, it's the voice that they have, that's based on the conviction that Jesus is Lord over every domain of reality, and not including politics, but especially politics. And so it's important for Christians to be there and to speak the truth in love, and be persuasive and winsome, so that Jesus is glorified by what we do. That's what the founders did. And we stand on their shoulders, and we should be servants as they were servants.
Amen. That's good. Janice, you want to piggyback on that?
Absolutely. Thank you for your words. Politics is the necessary vehicle, as is government, to operate in society. And everyone is touched by what we do, whether they're Christians or not. And I feel blessed to be in the role that I'm in, so that I can touch everybody by the actions that I take and what I do. And they may not know that it comes from a place in my heart to be the hands and feet of Jesus at first, but I'm hoping that my actions will serve as an example, so that they want to know, why did she do that? Why did she make that decision? Or why is this happening? And be an opportunity to cause a conversation to happen among people, so that we are spreading a message, but discreetly in a secular manner.
Yeah. That's good. And, I think most people would agree with everything both of you just said, but there's been some corruption. Go figure. And I think there's some trust issues. And sometimes there's that old phrase, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, or a couple bad apples can, spoil the whole bunch. I like to give people the benefit of the doubt that they really get in the game because they want to make a difference. They want to serve. And is it a slippery slope once they get in? Promises, lobbyists. How can they protect against possible corruption? Well, I don't know if we want to talk about trust issues at first. In general, trust levels with politicians are just really probably not that great. Bill, your turn.
So yeah, and the interesting thing is that I hit that trust criticism from culture coming from two angles. Being an ordained minister for almost 50 years, and then also being engaged in politics. That when you look at the professions that are least trusted in the polls in the United States, it's pastors and politicians. And it's a shame that both are called into question to the degrees that they are in culture. One of the important things that we need to take a look at, Chuck, is that back in the 60s, and I remember the 60s. I was born in 54, and so and of course there's that old joke that if you remember the 60s, you weren't there.
Right.
Yeah,
That's right.
I was on the cusp of getting involved, and I mean, I remember the Democrat convention of 1968. It was in my home city of Chicago, and there were riots, and buildings were on fire, and students were arrested. I mean, I remember the day that Martin Luther King was assassinated, and my city was under martial law. But one of the things that took place in the 60s, or actually a couple of things that took place in the 60s, one was Watergate. Coming right out of the 60s, that here we had placed a lot of trust in American presidents, and then we had a president that couldn't be trusted. Vietnam War, it was very unclear as to what was going on there. So people began to distrust authority, and the problem, Chuck, is that it's not that authority should not be naively embraced in every expression of authority, but somehow or another that by questioning authority, we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. There is legitimate authority, and then there's authority that has been abused. And it's important for us not to throw out the concept of authority and legitimate authority, as Janice said earlier, that, God has ordained government. Okay. He calls us to be, engaged. And we need to be having a conversation as how did Christians get disengaged? But in our society, what's happened is that there's this big question that, I'm a flawed person. Who am I to make any judgments about anybody politically or otherwise? And so all too often, people disengage because of their distrust. And so it's incumbent upon Christians who engage in government to do so from a servant's heart, to win back the credibility and the trustability that authority should have.
Yeah, that's good. Janice, your turn.
Pastors and politicians, whether we believe it or not, they're human beings, and human beings are flawed. Even though we are created in his great image, we are still held to a higher standard. And I don't know of anyone who enters into this realm with ill intentions. Do they set out saying, I want to be in this position of authority and power so that I can do bad things? It probably happens somewhere along the way when they realize it's a lot of pressure. It's very overwhelming, because suddenly when you do have that power and that authority, people come at you from all over the place, wanting you to do things for them that you wouldn't have done, or would have been ashamed that somebody else had done had they been in that situation. But now you're faced with just arrows coming from all over the place. And I don't want to give any examples to throw anyone under the bus, but yeah, we are all human. And what's important to build that trust is, how do we respond? Because it's not a matter of if we're going to face those circumstances, it's a matter of when we face those circumstances, being in the position of authority that we have. So how are we going to respond to it? And if we do make a mistake, how do we respond and regain the trust of public? Because I think that is important, to show our humanness, that we are touchable people and not just high up on a platform. Hey, I made a mistake and I fell down. This is what I'm going to do to seek repentance and forgiveness from the people who elected me to be there, and we're going to make it right. And I think that is something that we've lost in the trust factor among elected officials, is when they do mess up, they try to cover it up. And if you have to hide something, you probably shouldn't be doing it. And that, I think, is a great downfall, is the cover-ups, not the admittance of humanness.
Yeah, good point. And as you guys were talking, just reminded again of James chapter 1. Blessed is the man or woman, I would say, who endures temptation, for when he has been approved, he'll receive the crown of life which the Lord has promised to those who love him. And let no one say when he's being tempted, I'm tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then, when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it's full grown, brings forth death. So yeah, eventually you get caught. It blows up in your face, whatever. The death of a marriage, if it's that temptation, or in this case, integrity and in the workplace, in and out of politics, right? I mean, I've always heard it, the higher the level, the bigger the devil. So, when you talk about pastors or politicians, when you're in a position of leadership, the enemy would love to tempt those to fall, because when they fall, it's like dominoes. There's an effect. A lot of people give up because, wow, they had all their, they trusted, I had all my money on this guy. I thought he was the best. And I heard him preach and I heard him teach. And all of a sudden when you hear they fall, it's like, well, if he can't do it, and I thought he was a superstar, spiritual giant, and he fell, then there's really no hope for me. So Bill, you've been around long enough to in ministry. You've seen
and I encourage people, don't put your favorite political leaders up on a pedestal, or your favorite favorite pastor. Only Jesus deserves the unreserved trust, and it's not that we should be cynical. And Jesus warned us. He said, that we need to be as meek and doves, but as wise as serpents. And so it's not one or the other. And even Jesus himself, when you think of it, Chuck, take a look at the Gospel of John. And if you look at the end of chapter 2, right after the marriage feast at Cana, Jesus, it ends, Jesus does miracles, and it says there's this very, I don't want to say cryptic, but it's a very cautionary statement, by Jesus, is reported by John. It says that he did not entrust himself to any man because he knew what was in the hearts of men. And if Jesus was that cautious about human beings, we should follow his example. Right. But it's that same Jesus that did not reveal himself to any man because he knew what was in the hearts of men. He still went to the cross for those men. And that's where the servanthood and the sacrifice is. George Washington comes to mind. When you think about it, after the Revolutionary War, after he serves as president, they wanted to make him king. Okay, all that power would have been at his disposal. He would have been a peer with the King of England, and he turns it down. And George Washington turning down the kingship of America affects all of us today. That he was willing to say, I'm going to pass on the power because I'm not here for the power. I'm here to be a servant. God's using me at this point in history, and I'm not an end for the power. And right when you want to hand me all the power of the nation, I'm turning my back on it. I'm going back to Mount Vernon, and I'm going to go back to farming. So there's a humility that's there. And was George Washington a flawed human being? Yes, he was a flawed human being. Okay. But again, we're not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We need to be looking at the strengths and the godly and the Jesus-like, the Christ-like characteristics in people, emulate those, work with those that have those characteristics, and it's not if somebody falls, it's when they fall. How are we going to respond? Are we going to respond in grace? And even though we respond in grace, that doesn't mean that we respond in absolute trust. Okay.
Right.
You
Checks
know,
and balances, and that's why we have
there is.
our government set up
The
the way it
reason
is.
that our government is structured the way it is because sin exists. See,
Right.
all other forms of government, they don't exist, or based on the presupposition that sin exists. But the Christian presupposition that all men are sinners, that it calls for a form of government that tries to put the passions, those desires, Chuck, that you just read about from from the letter of James, that how are human passions put in check so that those passions are not expressed in such a way that the nation and the community is harmed because of one man or one woman's passions. And I'm not talking sexual passions. There could be avarice. It could be there's lots of passions that are there, but how do you put together a framework for government? That the founders, they just trusted lawmakers so much. They broke the government into three components. It used to be the judicial branch, executive branch, and legislative branch was all together under the crown. And they took the crown and they broke it into three different divisions, and they distrust lawmakers so much that they took that branch of government and separated it one more time to make it difficult for the government to limit the freedoms that were given to human beings made in the image and likeness of God. That God was free to make the creation and make the human being. He was free not to, but in God's freedom, he chose to make us, and he chose to make us free, and we are free for a purpose. And the founders, they said any time that the freedoms of a human being are going to be curtailed, it's going to take a lot of red tape to curtail the freedoms of human beings.
That's good. That's so good. Janice is also quite the minister in her own right. She's got a servant's heart. I'm sure you could probably piggyback. There's probably a few things you'd love to add on that.
Oh, there was a lot there to unpack. The notes that I'm making here, though, as I go back on what you just said, forgive but don't forget. And then, of course, my mind turned toward term limits among politicians. The length of time that we are called to serve matters, because the longer we are in our situation, the more time people get to see our humanness and see those mistakes and those flaws. And that probably lends itself to why we are where we are. There are so many politicians and people who are in higher office today that have been there, frankly, longer than I've even been alive. And that scares me. And why are they still there? Because they've had all that time to make those mistakes, and people see it, but yet they still keep getting elected. So the grace you alluded to, but did everyone forget? Did they forget what had happened? And I don't know, when you see someone making mistakes over and over again, I mean, how many times? 7 times 77 are we supposed to forgive? But at what point do we say this person maybe is not in the situation that they should be leading these people, leading our government? So those are just some notes that I made as you were speaking.
Right.
But some of us, not all of us, are in the situation that we are as elected leaders because we were elected, yes, but why did we even start? Why did we declare a candidacy in the first place? And many of us is because we were called by God. God knew. God knows what decisions we're going to make. He knows what situations are going to come our way. And so maybe we can speak to that for a moment about, well, if God knows already ahead of time how we're going to respond to a situation that we're faced with, then I would like to examine how we get called in the first place. and leaning on his power and his strength to make the decisions that he wants us to make for his people.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I'm glad having folks like you on, because we can have, bring in the Bible, bring in the Word. So I'm going to share our screen here and go with Bible Gateway. And so it's interesting to see what the verse of the day is. Whom have I in heaven but you? And there is none upon the earth that I desire beside you. My flesh and my heart fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. So that's Psalms 73, verses 25 and 26. And you brought up a really good theological point. And I wanted to piggyback on Proverbs 5:21. I added a period there and I didn't like it. So God, with that whole foreknowledge thing there, Proverbs 5:21 says, "For the ways of man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he, God, ponders all his paths." So, this is like all knowing to the umpteenth degree. I mean, we know Psalms 139. I know he knows when I lie down. He knows when I rise up. He knows what I think. He knows what I'm going to say. Such knowledge is too wonderful. But so here is God is looking at, and in this case, politicians. He's pondering all your paths. So you have free will, free choice. You can make those choices, but he's coaching us to make the good, better, best choice based on the circumstance and the situation. The hardcore question is, are we listening to God or not, and taking his advice if he's leading? And again, and we've got about 10 minutes left. And just, again, to maybe switch gears a little bit too, runforoffice.training. I have that website scrolling along the bottom. And that's how Bill, after all these years, and Janice, again, along the way, you're going to run into people who feel that calling, and they're going to ask you that, hey, how do I get started? I feel this pressing in my heart. I feel this burning desire to get in there. Where do I start? And that may be a lot of question for a lot of people. Some may be so overwhelming that they don't even want to ask the question, but it's really not that hard. One step at a time. And if God is pondering all your paths, he's going to show you the best moves to make, like a giant chess game, right? There's always a lot of different plays and multiple plays. And I think there's 8 billion chess players on the board right now. He's trying to work through each player to make the best move if they're listening. Bill?
So, well, Chuck, thank you for putting up the website there for the training. And I developed that training while I was working for Citizen Link, the political arm of Focus on the Family, and because there are Christians that want to get involved, and many like me, they had no previous political experience, and so, I wanted to pass on to brothers and sisters that they're feeling called by God to engage, but how do you start? And so the Run for Office training there is geared toward candidates. It doesn't matter whether you're running for school board or the U.S. Senate. The principles that are in in the training are for all levels. They're just, you scope them out depending on what office that you're running for. But we focus very strongly on biblical worldview, because there's so many Christians that get engaged in politics. So many they jump in with both feet without thinking about it. But Jesus tells us that we're supposed to count the cost. And when there are men and women, who confess Jesus as Lord, that jump into the political arena not knowing what they're doing, and they campaign in such a way that that it's a disgrace to God. One of my close friends that Focus on the Family, Brad Miller, used to frequently quote, that stupid for Jesus is still stupid. There are people that do things claiming that God told them to do it, but you can tell by the lack of excellence, the lack of care, the lack of servant's heart, the lack of preparation, that they weren't called. They said that they were. And so it's important that even running for office is an act of worship. God has created us to worship him through all that we do. Jesus is the Lord over every domain of reality. And when we are running for office, we have to remember the first thing that we represent is not ourselves, it's not our constituency, but we're representing Christ. We're representing that we are following his role as a servant to us and servant leadership. And so when a person is out in public running for office, that they need to remember that, when people are looking at you and you say you're a Christian and you're running for office, they're looking to see the Christ in you. And the question is Christ shining out through you as you conduct yourself? And not. Oh, yeah, but anyway, we're hoping that that's helpful for candidates.
Yeah, that's good. Janice, what do you think? Winning America back one candidate at a time.
Right. No, I love what you said, that some people say that God called them to run for office when it will be revealed. It will be evident later. Did God really call you to do that? Or are you just saying that because you know it sounds good and it might get you votes?
Yes.
And if someone is truly called, if God says go, I think it's Matthew maybe 18, he discusses being like a child, have childlike faith, run with open arms. And so when God says go, you don't stop, go and collect $200 before you pass go. You run into his arms, and he will equip you when you get there. And running for office is scary. It's a big deal. We're coming up on election season, and can you believe it's going to take an entire year of our lives where we're having these conversations over and over again? But recently, a pastor I enjoy listening to on a podcast said, worship is not a song, it's a lifestyle.
Excellent.
Yes. Credit to that is given to Pastor Louis Giglio out of Passion City Church in Atlanta, Georgia. And I love that, because you are so right. When we're pounding T-posts into the ground, putting our signs, when we're engaging in debate forums, that is worship. We want to be in that situation because we want to serve and be his hands and feet. Worship can be all of the things that come after that. We have no idea what we're going to get called to. When I was elected the first time in 2018, I had no idea the world was about to be turned upside down by a global pandemic. And we had to respond to that in those situations. And I remember thinking, wow, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I'm the right person to be making these choices for my neighbors, their children, my family. On a local level, even not even on a broader federal level. I'm making decisions locally and then having to explain that I don't really have authority because the decision was made by somebody who has even more authority than I do. But I'm there because I really do feel like the Lord equipped me to be in that moment and to serve those people. And that childlike faith, I had to worship him every moment in every day with everything that I did. And worship doesn't always look like raising our hands up and being full of joy. Worship is being in the trenches. Worship is doing
good,
the
bad, and
things
the ugly.
we're scared of.
All of it. That's good. But Bill, I know you got to run to another interview, and Janice, you both are amazing. Let's keep praying about your future guests. And final thoughts before we close out, Bill? You got to run?
Sure. I think I love that quote that worship is not a song, it's a lifestyle, because when you think of Adam and Eve in the garden, there were no lights, there were no buildings, there were no microphones, no guitars, no pianos, no sound systems, and all the things that we think that we need in order for worship to occur. We need to rethink that. When they were in the garden, they were told to be fruitful and multiply and to have dominion, and that includes science and art and, how do they relate to each other? And God created everything for the purpose of worshiping Him. And so when we limit worship to what happens when, they tune the guitar and get the sound level, we've missed it. We have absolutely, that's a part of it. But when we say that alone is worship, we're missing it. And loving God with our whole mind. And Janice, you know how important that is when a decision comes before you and there's a struggle. Should I go this way or that way? They both have their merits. They both have their flaws. And you pray to God for the wisdom that you have to intellectually worship God with your whole mind when you make that decision. So anyway, hey, Chuck, Janice, great meeting you. I look forward to more discussions, and I've got some ideas on some future programs. So, hey, God bless you both and have an awesome weekend and worship Thanks. God today. Don't wait till Sunday.
Amen.
Amen. Good word. God bless you guys. Until our next episode of Servant Leadership, Christians in Politics, may you and your families be blessed. Thanks for watching.
Amen. Thank you.
Celebrate the new year. We're having the biggest sale ever on overstock clearance and brand new products. For example, save 60% on our Goose Down comforters, the best comforters ever. They go perfectly with our MyPillow bed sheets and duvet covers. Save 25% on our brand new kitchen towels. They're made with the same technology as our famous My Towels. Our initial quantities are extremely low, so get them now before they go. Our seasonal flannel sheets are finally in. You save up to 50% and they sell out fast every year, so order now. They're truly the best flannel sheets you'll ever sleep on. Or save up to 80% on all our clearance items. And this is where it gets even better. For a limited time, your entire order ships absolutely free. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use that promo code to get deep discounts on all MyPillow products. And for a limited time, your order ships absolutely free.